Finally, after 52 years, someone filled the void inside me. We clicked right from our first accidental meeting. Her shy nature made her even more endearing to me. We had so many common interests, to the point where the age gap between us was no longer a barrier. And just like any other typical couple, we eased our tension with a drink. Clumsy as I was, I followed her lead and danced a bit. Then naturally we kissed, and in that moment of passion she whispered, "Choke me." We became one. India Chipchase was born in 1995 in Northampton, England. She was the eldest of 4 children born to Jeremy and Susan. To her parents, India was a kind, responsible, and warm-hearted daughter. To her younger siblings, she was the devoted older sister. Her younger brother, Harry, often told his friends that his sister was someone they could always rely on, caring and protective of her siblings. To those who knew her outside of her family, India left an impression as a beautiful, thoughtful young woman who always put others first. From a young age, she was passionate about helping those in need. By the time she was in college, despite her young age, she had earned her emergency rescue certification and was preparing to become an emergency responder at just 20 years old. Not only did India stand out for her compassionate heart, but she was also proactive about earning her own money to pay for her tuition. She worked part-time at a pub called the Calling Tree, located about a 20-minute drive from her home in Northampton. India believed this job would allow her to continue her studies without burdening her parents, even though her father, Jeremy, was a well-respected doctor. What India never expected, despite her independence, was that she wouldn't be able to hold on to her life lost in one fateful night in the heart of a large English city. On the evening of Friday, January 29th, 2016, 20-year-old India Chipchase was working her part-time job at the Calling Tree. That evening, she had plans to meet with 3 of her longtime friends for drinks. They decided to start at the pub where she worked, and later moved to a nearby bar called NB's. By 11:30 p.m., the group had moved to NB's to continue the fun. India and her friends had downed 6 Jaeger bombs in a row, getting drunk and excitedly dancing on the stage. After a while, India's friend Alice went to get more beer. When she returned, India was nowhere to be found on the dance floor. Assuming India had gone home early due to her drunken state, Alice returned to the group and continued the night with them. However, it wasn't until 4 p.m. the next day, Saturday, January 30th, 2016, that the Calling Tree pub called India's family with a voice full of concern. They explained that by now, like every other day, India should have been there for her shift, but she had never shown up. India had never been late for work in the entire year she had been employed there. The pub staff feared something had gone terribly wrong. India's family was equally distressed and immediately reported her as missing. Police quickly got involved, taking initial statements and suggesting she might just be a drunk girl who had gone to a friend's house or somewhere else. Investigators began questioning everyone who had been involved, especially those who had last seen India that night. But even her 3 friends, the ones she had planned to meet, didn't know anything more. One significant detail came to light around 1:41 a.m. India sent a confusing message on Snapchat to her friends saying, "Where our club?" At this point, she had been drinking heavily before vanishing from the bar. Unable to gather meaningful information from her friends, police turned to NB's bar, the last place her friends had seen India, hoping that the bouncer might have seen something, or at least could tell them if India had left with someone. They immediately spoke with the bouncer, who recalled seeing India around 1 a.m. on Saturday, January 30th, 2016. He said she appeared quite drunk, pulling out her phone to message someone and repeatedly calling but not getting through. She seemed frustrated, sending more messages before eventually giving up. A short while later, India returned to the bouncer, telling him that her phone was dying and she intended to go back inside to borrow a phone from a friend. However, according to bar policy, intoxicated patrons who left the bar could not re-enter. The bouncer therefore did not let her back in. Meanwhile, a taxi driver who had heard about India's disappearance came forward with a crucial piece of information. He explained that on the night in question, as he was pulling up near NB's bar, he saw India rush out of the bar and quickly hop into his cab. However, after talking with her, The driver learned she didn't have any money. She told him to drive her home and that she would pay him later. Assuming she was just another drunk, rambling customer with no real intention of going home, the driver became frustrated and kicked her out right in front of the bar. This raised a crucial question for the police who had India been calling that night. It seemed likely she was trying to meet up with someone and perhaps she had left with them. But who was this person? Realizing the situation was becoming more urgent around 4 a.m. on January 31st, 2016, 27 hours after India's disappearance, Northampton police reviewed the security cameras around the NB's bar area. The footage revealed that after being rejected by the taxi driver, India had spoken with an unfamiliar man right outside the bar. CCTV footage from 11:30 p.m. on Friday, January 29, 2016, showed a man pacing back and forth near the NB's nightclub. 2 weeks earlier, another CCTV clip had captured this same man loitering in the area. This indicated that he had been hanging around there for a while and wasn't solely targeting India. At 1 a.m. on Saturday, January 30th, 2016, just as the bouncer had reported, India was seen standing outside NB's bar trying to make a phone call. 10 minutes later at 1:10 a.m., after her phone battery died and her purse was empty, leaving her unable to contact any friends for help, an unknown man suddenly approached her. At first glance, it seemed as though this man knew India. His confident manner and conversation style made it hard for anyone to doubt this. He spoke while touching her arm, leaning in closer to her, speaking non-stop. After a while, he raised his finger as though suggesting they go somewhere. A few moments later, another camera angle nearby showed India getting into a taxi with this man. The police immediately took a snapshot of the man India had been seen talking to and posted the image within their team, asking for help in identifying him. Less than 5 minutes later, an officer spoke up, recognizing the man. He identified him as Edward Tenniswood, 52 years old, born in 1963. Edward Tenniswood was also from Northampton, just like India. He grew up in a fairly ordinary family. After leaving the military in his 20s, Edward worked various office jobs in accounting at several companies. He was an introvert, not one to socialize much with others. Because of this personality, he couldn't hold down a job for long. According to the officer, Edward had been unemployed for 2 years. In terms of his family life, both of Edward's parents had passed away a few years earlier, which had deeply affected him. His only remaining family member was his sister, but she had also died from a chronic illness a year prior. In general, Edward's life seemed to be overshadowed by darkness. And if he had approached India, the sense of impending doom for her was palpable. To the police at that moment, he became a person of great concern. After gathering witness statements and reviewing footage from security cameras, the police identified Edward as the primary suspect in India's disappearance. They requested a search warrant and headed to his home at 6 Stanley Road. At 4 a.m., just hours after India's disappearance, the police arrived outside Edward's apartment. They found it unusually quiet, which struck them as odd. They carefully entered the home, and as they opened the door, all the investigators were shocked by the scene before them. The inside of the house was bizarre furniture, and belongings were covered in white fabric and medical plastic, all coated in a thick layer of dust as though untouched for years. A few of his neighbors described Edward as eccentric, obsessed with cleanliness, to the point that he always wore latex gloves when meeting or shaking hands with others. He never invited anyone into his home. Ignoring the odd details, the police continued their search, moving from the first floor to the second. Then they were stunned when they found the body of a woman lying on a mattress on the floor. At first, they weren't sure if it was India, as the victim's face and upper body were covered with a white cloth. Her long black hair was neatly combed back, and her undergarments were disheveled, as though they had been removed and then hastily put back on. There was a wound on her ear and a small spot of red blood. As they moved closer and examined the body more closely, the heartbreaking truth became clear. The body was that of India Chipchase. Where was the killer? The police speculated that the criminal might have fled far away, but they continued to search for any final clues, hoping to tie him to the crime legally. Police used location tracking to pinpoint Edward's mobile phone calls, while also monitoring and checking security cameras at every hotel where he might be hiding. The search was urgent and intense. By 6 p.m. on January 31st, 2016, after hours of searching, they located Edward at the Ibis Hotel just 20 minutes from his home. At 6:47 p.m. in the hotel lobby, Edward was neatly dressed, watching TV when the police stormed in and apprehended him. In his backpack, they found latex gloves and a large knife. Edward seemed surprised and remarked, "Wow, you guys found me faster than I thought." Surprisingly, Edward didn't seem worried at all. After killing India, he remained calm, almost as if he were waiting to see when the police would finally catch up with him. According to the CCTV at the Ibis Hotel, where the police later arrested the killer at 9:30 p.m. on Saturday, January 30th, 2016, the same night the crime occurred, Edward entered the hotel with a kebab he had bought. When asked why he decided to go to the hotel that night, he explained, "After being with India, he noticed she wouldn't wake up and just kept sleeping. He felt something was wrong, so he got confused and went to the hotel to clear his head." At 3:22 a.m. on January 31st, 2016, Edward used the hotel's computer to search for news related to India's disappearance, curious if his name had appeared in the media yet. At 3:38 a.m., he stepped outside for about half an hour before returning to the hotel. Eventually, he was arrested at 6:47 p.m. that same day. 6 months after the incident, Edward's first trial began on Monday, July 18, 2016. The defendant remained consistent with his defense. "We loved each other from the first meeting until she died from an accident." Edward insisted that India had willingly engaged in sexual activity with him, and that during intimacy she suddenly asked him to choke her. He claimed that in following her request, he accidentally caused her death. However, the police continuously presented evidence that this was a case of abduction, rape, and premeditated murder planned from the very beginning. First, the police presented CCTV footage from outside NB's nightclub shown in court, clearly demonstrating that Edward had been loitering around the area 2 weeks before the crime occurred. It appeared he had been planning something long before. Furthermore, he had approached India, who was visibly intoxicated and not fully aware of her surroundings. Second, the autopsy confirmed that India's time of death occurred between 3 and 4 a.m. on January 30th, 2016. Over 30 injuries were found on her body, mainly around her ears, nose, mouth, tongue, neck, chest, buttocks, and legs. The primary cause of death was determined to be strangulation leading to suffocation. The most compelling evidence was that Edward's DNA was found under India's fingernails, meaning that just before her death, she had struggled to fight off the man. Fourth, a witness who was near NB's bar at the time recalled hearing Edward tell India, "Don't worry, I'll take you home safely." This further suggested that he had lied to India and lured her into a trap. Fifth, the testimony of the taxi driver who drove Edward and India that night further confirmed that the events were part of a premeditated plan. Initially, when Edward entered the cab, he asked to go to a nearby McDonald's. At 1:28 a.m., the driver overheard India impatiently trying to contact someone. A moment later, Edward changed his mind and asked the driver to drop them at a gas station near his home. By 1:35 a.m., on their way to the gas station, Edward again changed his mind and asked to be dropped off at the end of Stanley Street. The significance of this was clear. Stanley Street was the street right in front of Edward's house. Sixth, testimony from a neighbor along with the presence of Edward's Ford. Francis confirmed an important truth. Edward had indeed taken India into his home at 1:40 a.m. The neighbor recalled seeing Edward helping India as they both entered house number 6 on Stanley Street. Based on police estimates, around 3 a.m. that morning, inside Edward's home, India was sexually assaulted, abused, and ultimately suffocated. Seventh, another neighbor revealed that Edward had been late paying his rent several months before the incident. People also suspected that he had been loitering around bars and nightclubs for weeks, possibly to seek out new targets, or to settle some debt, or perhaps to end everything with a tragic event like the one that occurred. In August 2016, during the final trial, the jury reviewed the entire case and concluded that Edward was guilty of first-degree murder, the most serious charge carrying the highest penalty. In addition to premeditated murder and sexual assault on India, The judge described Edward as a delusional loner who had brutally raped and murdered an innocent girl. The judge remarked, "This is a terrible crime. The defendant sought to satisfy his perverse sexual desires with young women committing a heinous act. It's a moral decay. He must have been very convincing to lure his victim to him when she was too drunk to take care of herself." Finally, Edward was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, plus an additional 12 years for rape. In total, he would have to serve 42 years before any chance of parole. Edward was convicted, yet even to the end he insisted that they had been in love. A more heartbreaking revelation came to light. In fact, when India was standing outside NB's bar, the person she had been repeatedly texting and calling was her new boyfriend, Grant Heeson, whom she had only been dating for 3 weeks. But as things unfolded, Grant didn't respond to her messages, nor did he pick up the phone when she called. While sitting in the taxi that Edward had called India, used the last of her phone battery to try calling Grant again, but once again he didn't pick up. By 3:30 a.m., Grant had returned home after spending time at another nightclub with friends. He saw the missed calls from India and tried calling her 3 times. However, when he noticed her phone was off, he just thought he would call back the next day, unaware that at that very moment India was fighting against a perverted man in a house and would soon lose her life. Edward had a troubled past with a history of criminal offenses. At 52 years old, Edward had been charged and convicted of 2 offenses in the past, but both times he was released on bail. One of the charges involved an accusation of rape from a woman he had known 20 years ago. According to her, she had rejected him after a few dates due to his jealousy and odd behavior. However, he showed up at her house demanding to know why she disliked him, and then suddenly grabbed her by the neck and kissed her forcibly. He posted bail and was released for this incident. In another case, Edward had been convicted of assaulting a male neighbor. They had been close friends for some time, but the neighbor eventually distanced himself from Edward. Edward showed up at his door unexpectedly, threatening him with a knife and attacking him. He was released on bail just 2 weeks before the murder of India. Additionally, at Edward's house, investigators found a handwritten letter exchanged with a famous model from about 30 years ago when he was in his 20s. Edward claimed the letter had been written to him by the model, who was a person he called Stuart White. The model, in a media interview, confirmed that Edward was a complete stranger to her, someone she had never met or heard of before. However, Edward persisted in claiming they had dated when they were younger. In his desk drawer and photo frames, there were numerous pictures of this model when she was working as a model. Many of the pictures had been torn by his own hand. What was even more shocking was that the model's face closely resembled India's. This revelation shocked and enraged both the media and the people of England. Edward is currently serving his sentence at HM Prison Wood Hill, a facility that houses only notorious Level A criminals. His lawyer reported that Edward claimed a fellow inmate snuck into the shower while he was bathing and threatened to strangle him. Now Edward lives in constant fear of death threats from fellow prisoners in his block. After the incident, India's parents Jeremy and Susan Chipchase founded a security organization to help women get home safely at night, especially those who are intoxicated and at risk of becoming easy targets for sexual predators. These are the heartbreaking words of India's father, Jeremy Chipchase, words that will likely continue to resonate with sorrow long after. I wish for other women not to bear the tragedy and pain that my daughter did. I also hope that parents with daughters will never have to go through this tragedy. I wish no father ever has to open his daughter's coffin, pull back the cloth, and say, "I love you, my daughter." And no father should ever feel sorrow for not being able to walk his daughter down the aisle. Therefore, I want to say it once more, I hope no more victims will suffer the way my daughter did. I hope no other families will endure the pain of loss that my family has gone through.